There is a moment in life when you realize that the greatest power other people have over you is not necessarily what they can do to you, but what they can make you feel. Someone ignores you, and suddenly you feel rejected. Someone criticizes you, and you spend the entire night replaying their words. Someone disrespects you, and you feel compelled to prove yourself. Someone succeeds while you struggle, and comparison begins to poison your confidence. Someone changes their attitude toward you, and your entire emotional state changes with them. Look closely at what is happening. The event itself is often small. The psychological reaction is enormous. This is where you must begin if you want to reach a state where nothing and nobody can control your inner world again. You must stop handing people emotional authority over you. This does not mean becoming cold. It does not mean pretending that you have no feelings. And it certainly does not mean allowing people to mistreat you without consequence. It means something much more powerful, learning to experience an emotion without becoming its servant. Most people react before they understand what has happened inside them. Someone says something insulting, and they immediately answer. Someone withdraws attention, and they chase. Someone challenges their competence, and they become defensive. Their emotional reaction becomes predictable, and once your reactions become predictable, other people can influence you with very little effort. Think about that carefully. If someone knows exactly what will make you angry, they have found a button inside you. If they know what will make you jealous, they can press it. If they know what will make you desperate for approval, they can manipulate you through praise and withdrawal. If they know that you cannot tolerate being ignored, silence becomes a weapon. The problem is not simply that difficult people exist. The deeper problem is that you have allowed their behavior to determine your internal state. And this is why emotional self-mastery begins with observation. Instead of immediately asking, "How dare they do this to me?" ask, "Why did this affect me so deeply?" That question changes everything. Perhaps the insult touched an insecurity you have been trying to hide. Perhaps rejection reminded you of an old fear of not being valuable. Perhaps someone's success awakened your own dissatisfaction. Perhaps their criticism hurt because somewhere inside you secretly believed it might be true. When you investigate your reactions instead of merely defending them, you begin discovering yourself. This is one of the most uncomfortable forms of personal growth, because it removes the easy excuse. It becomes harder to blame everyone else when you realize that your emotional triggers are revealing unfinished parts of your own psychology. A mature person does not say, "Nobody should ever upset me." A mature person says, "I want to understand why this has the power to upset me." That distinction is enormous. Because once you understand the mechanism, you can interrupt it. Imagine someone insults you publicly. Your first impulse may be to respond immediately. Your pride demands retaliation. Your mind begins constructing arguments. You imagine what you should have said. You imagine how you could embarrass them in return. But what happens if you pause? You create distance between the stimulus and your response. That small distance is where psychological freedom begins. You observe the anger, you do not deny it. You simply refuse to obey it. You breathe, you evaluate. You ask yourself, what outcome do I actually want? Suddenly, the situation changes. Maybe the correct response is to say something firmly. Maybe it is to walk away. Maybe it is to establish a boundary. Maybe it is to say nothing because the other person is deliberately trying to provoke you. The important thing is that the decision comes from strategy rather than impulse. This is how you become difficult to control. And notice the paradox. Sometimes the strongest response is not a response at all. People often believe power must be demonstrated through confrontation. But genuine psychological strength frequently appears as restraint. You do not need to answer every accusation. You do not need to correct every misunderstanding. You do not need to defend yourself against every opinion. Why? Because attention is a form of energy. Every time you obsess over someone else's judgment, you are investing part of your mental life in them. Every time you repeatedly replay an insult, you allow a moment that lasted seconds to occupy hours of your existence. The person who insulted you may have already forgotten what they said. You are the one still carrying it. That is the hidden cost of emotional dependence. You may believe you are punishing the other person by remaining angry, but often you are only punishing yourself. This is why you must become selective about what deserves your attention. Not every opinion deserves an answer. Not every rejection deserves an explanation. Not every person deserves access to your emotional world. And not every conflict deserves your participation. There is a profound freedom in realizing that you do not have to attend every psychological battle that other people invite you into. Some people will misunderstand you. Let them. Some will underestimate you. Let them. Some will criticize you because they genuinely see a weakness. Listen and evaluate. Others will criticize you because your progress threatens their image of themselves. Recognize it and move forward. The point is not to assume that every critic is jealous or malicious. That would simply replace one form of emotional blindness with another. The point is to become capable of evaluating criticism without allowing it to define your identity. You can hear an insult without becoming insulted. You can hear praise without becoming dependent on praise. You can experience rejection without concluding that you are worthless. You can experience success without believing you are superior. That is emotional sovereignty, and it changes your relationships with people. When you no longer desperately need approval, you stop performing for approval. When you no longer fear rejection, you become more honest. When you no longer need to win every argument, you become more strategic. When you no longer need everyone to understand you, you gain the freedom to pursue your path without constantly explaining yourself. This is not weakness, it is control. The goal is not to make the world stop affecting you. That is impossible. You are human. You will feel anger, disappointment, attraction, fear, excitement, grief, and joy. The goal is to make sure that feeling something does not automatically mean acting on it. Feel the emotion, study it, understand it, then decide. Because the moment you stop allowing other people's behavior to dictate your behavior, you reclaim something far more valuable than their approval. You reclaim yourself. Do not surrender your inner world to some, and once you begin taking control of your reactions, you discover something even deeper. Emotional strength does not come from caring less. It comes from learning how to care without becoming dependent. This is where detachment becomes essential. Most people misunderstand detachment. They imagine a detached person as someone cold, distant, or incapable of love. But genuine detachment is not the absence of emotion. It is the absence of emotional slavery. You can care deeply about someone and still understand that you cannot control them. You can love someone and accept that they may leave. You can admire someone without needing their approval. You can work intensely toward a goal without allowing the outcome to determine your worth. That is a much more sophisticated form of strength. The problem begins when your happiness becomes attached to conditions you cannot control. You tell yourself, I will be happy when they respect me. I will be confident when people recognize my value. I will feel secure when this person chooses me. I will finally relax when everything goes according to plan. But notice what you have done. You have placed your emotional stability in someone else's hands, and once you do that, you become vulnerable to every change in the environment. Someone's mood changes, and yours changes. Someone becomes distant, and you become anxious. Someone praises you, and you feel powerful. Someone criticizes you, and suddenly you question yourself. Your emotional life becomes a mirror reflecting whatever happens around you. This is exhausting, and more importantly, it makes you predictable. The person who desperately needs affection can be controlled through affection. The person who desperately needs recognition can be controlled through praise. The person who desperately fears abandonment can be controlled through withdrawal. The person who cannot tolerate uncertainty will constantly seek reassurance. If you want freedom, you must identify what you are afraid to lose. Because whatever you believe you cannot live without can eventually become a lever someone else can use against you. This is why detachment begins with acceptance. Accept that people are unpredictable. Accept that circumstances change. Accept that relationships evolve. Accept that opportunities disappear. Accept that some people will misunderstand you. Accept that even your carefully constructed plans can fail. This does not mean becoming pessimistic. It means becoming psychologically prepared. When you accept uncertainty, uncertainty loses some of its power over you. Think about someone walking through life expecting everyone to remain loyal forever. Every betrayal becomes a psychological earthquake. Now imagine someone who understands that human beings change. They do not become cynical. They simply refuse to build their entire identity around permanence. When someone leaves, it hurts, but it does not destroy them. When someone disappoints them, they experience disappointment, but they do not collapse. When a plan fails, they adjust. That is resilience. And resilience is not created by avoiding pain. It is created by developing the capacity to experience pain without allowing it to dictate your future. There is another important distinction here. Acceptance is not submission. If someone repeatedly disrespects you, detachment does not mean staying silent. You can walk away. You can establish a boundary. You can remove access. You can say no. You can end the relationship. But you do these things from clarity rather than emotional desperation. That distinction matters. When people act from desperation, they often overreact. They threaten, they plead, they seek revenge, they try to force another person to understand their pain. But when you are detached, you do not need the other person to validate your decision. You simply recognize reality and respond to it. This is one of the most powerful psychological shifts you can make. Stop asking, "How do I make this person change?" Start asking, "What does their behavior tell me, and what should I do with that information?" The first question gives them power. The second gives it back to you. You cannot control whether someone respects you. You can control whether you continue giving them access to you. You cannot control whether someone loves you. You can control whether you abandon your own dignity trying to earn their affection. You cannot control whether an opportunity appears. You can control whether you prepare yourself when it does. You cannot control how the world responds to you. You can control how you position yourself within it. This is the philosophy of emotional independence. And emotional independence creates an unusual kind of confidence. You become less needy. You become less reactive. You become more patient. You stop rushing decisions because you no longer need immediate emotional relief. You begin thinking in terms of consequences rather than impulses, and ironically, this often makes you more attractive to other people. Because desperation pushes people away, while self-possession creates gravity, consider relationships. When you desperately need someone to stay, you may tolerate behavior that violates your values. You overlook disrespect. You suppress your opinions. You become overly accommodating. But when you know that you can survive someone's absence, you negotiate differently. You are capable of saying, "I care about you, but I will not betray myself to keep you." That is not arrogance. That is self-respect. The The same principle applies to ambition. If you desperately need one particular outcome, failure can feel like a verdict on your identity. But if your attachment is to the process rather than one specific outcome, failure becomes information. You adjust, you learn, you continue. This is why emotionally powerful people often appear calm during uncertainty. They are not necessarily less ambitious. They simply understand that obsession with a particular outcome can distort judgment. They want the result, but they do not need the result to prove their worth. That difference is enormous. You should want things intensely, but hold them intelligently. Love people, but do not possess them. Pursue success, but do not worship it. Build relationships, but do not make them your entire identity. Accept praise, but do not depend upon it. Learn from criticism, but do not become defined by it. And when something leaves your life, resist the instinct to immediately replace it. Sometimes the emptiness created by loss is where you finally discover how much of yourself you had outsourced to another person. Sit with that emptiness, learn from it, use it, because the person who can be alone without feeling incomplete becomes extraordinarily difficult to manipulate. And that brings us closer to the final transformation, building an inner world so strong that external chaos no longer determines your identity. You will still care, you will still feel, you will still experience disappointment, but something fundamental will have changed. You will no longer confuse attachment with love, control with security, or approval with worth. You will understand that people can enter your life without owning your peace and leave your life without taking it with them, and this is where the entire transformation reaches its final stage. Once you have learned to observe your reactions and detach yourself from the need to control people and outcomes, you arrive at a much deeper question: what have you built inside yourself? Because emotional freedom is not created simply by removing people from your life. It is created by building something within you that does not collapse when circumstances change. You need an inner world, a private psychological foundation that belongs to you. Most people spend their lives constructing an identity from external materials. Their confidence comes from status. Their sense of worth comes from relationships. Their happiness depends on attention. Their identity depends on achievement, appearance, money, recognition, or the opinions of others. And because these things are external, they are unstable. When the praise disappears, confidence disappears. When the relationship ends, identity disappears. When the career changes, purpose disappears. When someone criticizes them, certainty disappears. They have built themselves on ground that can move. So the real objective is not to become unaffected by everything. The objective is to become rooted deeply enough that external events cannot easily uproot you. This begins with knowing yourself, not the version of yourself you present to the world, but the person you are when nobody is watching. What do you value? What are you willing to sacrifice for? What will you refuse to tolerate? What kind of person are you trying to become? What weaknesses repeatedly control your decisions? What fears have been quietly directing your life? These questions are uncomfortable because self-knowledge removes the luxury of pretending. You cannot build inner strength while constantly avoiding the truth about yourself. If you are insecure, acknowledge it. If you crave approval, acknowledge it. If you are easily intimidated, acknowledge it. If you become jealous, acknowledge it. If you have a tendency to seek revenge when your ego is wounded, acknowledge it. Awareness is not weakness. Awareness is the beginning of control. You cannot master what you refuse to see. And once you know yourself, you need principles, because when you have no internal principles, the environment becomes your guide. You become whatever the situation demands. Around confident people, you become insecure. Around aggressive people, you become defensive. Around wealthy people, you feel inferior. Around attractive people, you seek approval. Around successful people, you compare yourself. Your personality becomes a reaction to whoever happens to be standing in front of you. A strong inner world changes that. You begin deciding in advance what kind of person you will be. You decide that you will not betray your values for temporary approval. You decide that you will not respond to every provocation. You decide that you will not chase people who repeatedly demonstrate that they do not value your presence. You decide that failure will become information rather than identity. You decide that your attention will be treated as something valuable. These decisions create psychological structure, and structure creates stability. This is why discipline matters so much. People often think discipline is about forcing yourself to work harder, but psychologically, discipline is much more profound. It teaches you that you can trust yourself. Every time you keep a promise you made to yourself, your internal confidence increases. You said you would do something, and you did it. You said you would stop wasting your time, and you stopped. You said you would finish the work, and you finished. You said you would walk away from something destructive, and you walked away. Slowly, you develop evidence that you are capable of governing yourself, and that is a different kind of confidence. It does not require an audience. Nobody needs to applaud you for it. Nobody needs to recognize it. You know. That is enough, and when you reach that point, external validation begins losing its grip. You can receive praise without needing it. You can receive criticism without collapsing. You can succeed without becoming arrogant. You can fail without becoming worthless. You become psychologically flexible because your identity is no longer attached to one temporary condition. This is also why you must learn the power of solitude, not loneliness, solitude. Loneliness is the painful feeling that you are disconnected from others. Solitude is the ability to remain connected to yourself even when nobody else is around. In solitude, you discover how much noise you have been using to avoid your own thoughts. You discover whether you actually like your own company. You discover what you believe when there is no audience to impress. And perhaps most importantly, you learn that silence is not always emptiness. Sometimes silence is where your strongest thoughts appear. If you constantly need stimulation, attention, conversation, notifications, entertainment, and approval, you never give your mind enough space to develop independence. You become addicted to external input. But when you can sit alone and think, when you can work without applause, when you can move forward without announcing every step, you begin developing an internal source of direction. That internal direction becomes extremely difficult to manipulate because manipulation depends heavily on confusion. If someone can make you question yourself, they gain leverage. If someone can make you desperate, they gain leverage. If someone can make you afraid of losing them, they gain leverage. But when you know who you are, what you value, and where you are going, psychological manipulation becomes much harder. You may still be deceived, you may still make mistakes, you may still experience emotional pain, but you recover faster because your center remains intact. This is the ultimate meaning of becoming unaffected. It does not mean becoming a stone, it means becoming an anchor. The storm can arrive, the waves can become violent, people can misunderstand you, plans can fail, relationships can change, doors can close, and yet beneath all of it, there is something in you that remains. Your values, your discipline, your self-respect, your purpose, your ability to choose your response. That is the part of yourself you must protect. Because once you understand this, you stop trying to control the entire world. You stop demanding that everyone behave correctly. You stop expecting life to be fair. You stop wasting energy trying to force certainty into an uncertain existence. Instead, you focus on the one territory where you can actually become powerful, yourself. And there is a final paradox here. The less you need the world to behave a certain way, the more effectively you can operate within it. You become calmer because you are not constantly fighting reality. You become sharper because emotion is no longer clouding every decision. You become more strategic because you are thinking beyond the immediate moment. You become more peaceful because your peace is no longer rented from other people. That is the destination, not indifference, not isolation, not emotional numbness, self-possession. The world will continue to test you. People will disappoint you, some will betray you, others will underestimate you. Circumstances will sometimes turn against you. Let them. You cannot prevent every storm, but you can build a structure that does not collapse every time the weather changes. And when you finally understand that, you stop asking, "How can I make nothing hurt me?" You begin asking a better question: "How can I become strong enough to feel everything without losing myself?" That is the real freedom.